How's it going, everybody, and welcome to episode 261 of Master My Garden podcast. Now, this week's episode being the last day of January, thank God. Um, we're looking at the seed sowing guide for February. So, you've heard me talking about it before. I've mentioned it on the podcast over the last couple of weeks. But February is the month where we can kind of get started, in my opinion, sowing seeds. I know I've seen it over the last month, loads of people sowing seed, but if you're to look at Ireland as a good example, I don't know who in the right mind would sow a seed in the last month, given what has been happening in the country. And, when we went to air last week, we were in the, live on Friday with last week's episode. It was right in the middle of Storm Eowyn, and there was a lot of unknown, and I sort of hoped that everybody would get through okay in terms of, polytunnels and so on. And that has not been the case. To be honest with you, it has been shocking what has happened across the whole country, and seeing the devastation in so many of the gardening groups and polytunnels gone. And I suppose that's really bad. If you have a polytunnel, you've put your heart and soul into it, or you're excited to get going, and it gets flattened in the last couple of weeks. If it has just lost a polytunnel, which has just lost its skin, I guess, or the cover on it, that's a nuisance, but it's not so bad. It can get recovered, and it can get covered quite quickly, and you'll still be up and running. But if you have, frames damaged, badly damaged beyond repair, which a lot of people have, that's very, very frustrating. And as frustrating as it is for us home gardeners, for people who don't depend on it from a livelihood, just think of the quite a lot of, market gardeners and vegetable growers who have had, complete wipeouts of some of their growing structures. And that's really, really difficult at this stage of the year. So I suppose just to acknowledge that, from my point of view, thankfully, on Friday we had next to no damage. It was quite strong, but we didn't have damage. We were out without power for the guts of a day, which in the grand scheme of things, compared to other parts of the country, we certainly got away lightly, and we're thankful for that. That's the one thing about being so far inland and where I am. We're quite exposed for certain winds, but that wind last week, we definitely avoided the very, very worst of it. I know that many people on the western coast of Ireland have got, severe damage. And so, just if you have, it's still early, so hopefully you can get things up and running again with your greenhouses. But it's a tough blow to take at this stage of the year. And as I say, bear in mind those growers who are depending on it for their livelihoods, as much as it's a nuisance for us gardeners when you're depending on it for a livelihood. Those guys need our support over the coming months, in terms of buying their produce and helping them to get up and running, and supporting them over the coming months, because we need those producers around the country, for sure. So, as I say, the damage across the country has been quite severe, and it has probably set people back. Having said that, there's lots of people across the country who have got away, and I'm one of those, and I'm very thankful for that. I'm sure won't always be that lucky, but on this occasion, yeah, it's I feel lucky that we didn't get the brunt of that storm. So I suppose looking at that, um, it's this time of the year again. So as I said, this episode goes out on the last day of January, and it's been a horrible month in terms of weather here. Pretty much around here we had a week of snow, and again, I know other areas didn't have that, so it swings and roundabouts. But the damage done by the storm over the weekend, unbelievable rain this week. We've had some days of just torrential rain non-stop, and yeah, quite a bit of flooding around here and things like that. So it has been weather-wise, it's been a horrible month, but it is a winter month, and I never really mind getting too much bad weather at that stage, so long as when we're supposed to kind of get normal spring weather and normal summer weather, that we do get that. So fingers crossed for that. But as we exit January, it's now really is the time where we can actually start thinking about and properly get going at sowing seed. I always say, and I know anyone that listens the whole time was probably sick of me saying this, but When to start sowing is it's it's not a set defined date. It's more of a let's sense and see when feels right. And when feels right is typically when, the temperatures come up. There's a sense of spring in the air. You can always almost feel it, almost sense it. Nature starts to wake up, and then that's a good indicator to you that it's a good time to get sown seed. Having said all that, regardless of what's happening on that front, there is some seeds that we do need to get going this month, and some that I will certainly be sowing. So from that point of view, I'm going to go through a list. I'll just mention the list, but there's quite a bit on it. You don't have to sow everything. You can pick and choose what suits you, but there's certainly some of them that I'll be at this month, and quite a few of them I'll be at. But I typically won't be starting until, as we enter the second week. It's from there to the end of the month that you really start to see the stretch in the days in terms of daylight, and that's a huge indicator and a huge help in terms of sowing seed. Seed sown prior to that, it's very hard to get enough daylight to prevent them from being leggy. And then when you see the last week, where we've had such grey days, wet days, that what ends up happening is there's so little sunlight, and then the the grey days are really drawing out seedlings. So, and then of course you have to mind them all the way up along as well. So I will be sowing, but it's going to be kind of mid month after the second week, that kind of time frame. That's when I get going. But to give you an idea of what we can sow this month, to talk about flowers and vegetables. So in terms of the veg garden, first spring onions. This, we can get back at these now, and we're going to be sowing these quite regularly. So initially, I'm sowing these in module trays and multi-sowing them several seeds into an individual module, and then they'll get planted out. For me, they'll get planted out into the polytunnel as soon as they're ready, which will be in a few weeks' time. I'm also sowing early varieties of cabbage, early varieties of calabrese. I'm definitely not going to grow as much calabrese this year. It's just, I find it just, it's lovely at the start of the year, get some into the polytunnel, get a crop early. But I just find that in general, they're a crop that takes up too much space for the return on them, to be honest with you. Cauliflower, again, I would be sowing early this month. Onions, I've quite a lot to sow. I have a good few sets going well in the tunnel. They're actually flying at the moment, so happy with those. But some onions from seed to sort of fill that gap. And I'm pretty confident this year that I'm going to get quite close to having onions for 12 months. I think I'll probably run out sometime in April, and then should be able to harvest out of the tunnel in May. So yeah, it's looking good to be getting close to a 12 month harvest of my own onions. So that's good. Spinach I'll sow this month. Again, look, I'll probably stick with a winter hardy variety just at the moment. And then leeks, I will sow broad beans. I haven't sowed yet. Sometimes you can sow them. Well, not sometimes. It's good to sow them in the autumn time, but I haven't done that yet, so I will sow them now this month. Radish again into the polytunnel. Uh, Probably sow that, not probably, I will sow that directly into the polytunnel. I'm going to sow some white turnip, Milan purple top turnip, and I will sow lettuce as well. So I'm going to do a couple of varieties of lettuce, and I get them in February as well. Again, most of these late in the month. I'm going to sow some beetroot direct sown into the ground. I'm going to some carrots directly sown into the ground in the polytunnel, both of those into the polytunnel. I'll probably do another little sowing of winter salads, still harvesting away on some of those out there. Rocket, I'm still harvesting away on. Couple of the herbs, something has eaten my parsley. Um, it looks like somebody has come and just basically pulled all the leaves off the plant. Anybody that could potentially do that says they didn't, so I don't know, but it looks like somebody has fleeced it now. I know Emmy does go out there and she does create homes for bugs, and sometimes she needs leaves to go in there, so maybe that's where I should be looking. But essentially, she's just wiped them out and left nothing but stalks. So I need to get sowing herbs. So also coriander, dill, parsley, some of those at this stage. I'll also sow the kind of one sowing of chard that I'll do for the next while. That's I'll do that now. So probably 4 or 5 plants again. Still harvesting off the ones that went into polytunnel towards the end of last year, and they're welcome greens all over the winter. Going to sow peppers and chilies again, they'll be on heat now. So peppers and chilies sown on heat, they just need a long season, and I need to get them going now as well. So have some new chili peppers and some pepper seed from last year, sweet bell peppers from last year. They're all going to get sown in the coming weeks. Again, that'll be on heat. And tomatoes again sown on heat, and that'll be sown in the next kind of week, 2 weeks maybe. And I've got some nice interesting varieties there. I'm looking to get the cherry tomato clementine. Um, haven't been able to access it yet, but I will get it in the coming weeks. And that's one that I want to try. I've seen some people with getting huge crops from that, so I want to try that one as well. And that's kind of the list of what will be sown. So just to shoot over it again, looking at spring onion, cabbage, calabrese, cauliflower, onion, spinach, leeks, broad beans, radish, turnip, lettuce, beetroot, winter salads, some of the herbs, chard, peppers and chili on heat, and tomatoes on heat, and beetroot and carrots directly into the ground in the tunnel as well. I'll obviously get some potatoes into, depending on how the temperature is going, into the polytunnel as well. Early varieties this month, and maybe a salad variety, Charlotte, if I can get it as well. And that'll be, yeah, all hopefully in the month of February. And then as we get into March, fingers crossed, the weather will be starting to get a good bit warmer. We'll have a lot longer days, and then we'll be able to really, really kick off at that stage. So that's kind of the veg sowing list. Uh, for any of you that want a comprehensive list month by month, available on the Grow Your Own Food course. The link of that is in the bio, or in the show notes of this episode. And some flower seeds that we can sow as well. So there's again a few of these that I'll be getting going with. So calendulas, I'll be getting going with some pansies, sweet peas, Cosmos you can sow this month, but I actually won't be sowing it this month. It's too far away from when I can get it outside. Be gone a bit leggy. So if I do sow it this month, it'll be at the very end, but more than likely into March before I'll actually sow my Cosmos. Um, there's a bit of minding on them then to get leggy here. You need to pinch them out quite regularly, and as I say, I can't really get them out in the ground here until at least the middle of May, probably possibly a bit later. So there's no great benefit in me getting them in, sowing them just yet, so I'll leave it for another few weeks. There's a good few perennial seeds that you can actually sow as well. And so I have a lot of perennial seed. I have a few beds that are getting revamped at the moment, and they're going to need some of those. So I'll get sowing those this month as well. I didn't do any perennial sowing at the back end in the autumn time, which is the time that I recommend, as you know, but I didn't actually get any sowed at that stage. So I'll do them here in the springtime, and they'll be perfectly fine. Won't get much flower this year, but they'll be still getting stronger, and they'll be good plants going into next year. So yeah, that's the seed sowing list for February. People seem to like these episodes, gives them the little prompt. I know that I've done one, the same episode last year, and potentially people are sick of hearing the same thing. But I do think it gives people just a little prompt, a little idea of what to be at this month. Don't panic is the big thing, the big message. I saw in one of the gardening groups, somebody recommended listening to the podcast to get an idea of what to sow in each individual month, and the person the person asked what to sow in January, and whoever answered said, "Listen to Master My Garden podcast," but he's probably going to recommend not to sow anything in January and to hold off for a few weeks, and that is the message from myself. Having said that, as I say the whole time, you know probably better your own area. So if you're in an area that's considerably warmer, considerably earlier than where I am, then by all means get to know your area and have a go at it. But from now on, seed sowing will start here for me. But it is a case of still proceed quite gently, quite cautiously, and wait for spring to tell you when, and nature to tell you when it's time to get going. So that's the seed sowing list for February. Quite short, quite a short episode, I guess. Other things that you can do, and there's still loads of time for bare roots, all the different bare roots. Still lots of time for fruit bushes, fruit trees, and that sort of thing. So hedging, there's still loads of time for it. In fact, the ground is quite wet now for bare roots. So towards the end of February and into March is going to be really, really important. If you can get the ground to dry up, that window is going to be quite important, because in general, the bare root season has been quite slow and sluggish because of weather. And it probably means there's a good bit to be planted between now and the end of it and end of the window. The other thing that's noticeable, actually, talking to people over the last couple of days, talking to a couple of different groups of people, and a lot of people seem to be getting really huge amounts of damage from deers. And I know we are having, there's a kind of an overpopulation of them at the moment. The extent of that, I'm not that overly sure on, because we don't actually tend to see too many of them around here. But there is a huge overpopulation in certain areas, and I know a lot of people are getting damage on fruit trees, on new plantations that they've done. So yeah, that seems to be a big problem. So you want to be getting protecting. There is tree shelters that you can get, tree protectors that you can get. So if you are in an area that's potentially vulnerable to them, you definitely need to be protecting them now, because there does seem to be in certain areas an overpopulation of them. In the garden here, something that I'm not sure if I've mentioned it before, but on around Christmas time, for the very first time ever, I've seen woodpeckers here in the garden. My friend a couple of years ago saw one about 2 or 3 miles, 3 or 4 kilometers away, and I'd never seen one here around here in this area in the garden or anything like it. And then one day I looked out at the bird feeder recently, and there was a woodpecker on it. Now, it was a fleeting visit that lasted a couple of minutes, and I was extremely excited by this. I know it's the small things, as I said last week, that kind of excite me, but that's something that I was very excited about. And then that was at Christmas time, or sometime just a little bit before Christmas. But since then, I'm delighted to say that he's come back, or he or she, I'm not sure which it is, but they've come back 3, 4 times to the feeder now, and they seem to be staying a little while when they're there. Whether So they're a beautiful bird, obviously, and really nice to see them. I'm not that sure their habits or anything yet, because it's so new here for me. Haven't done any real looking into it yet, but definitely seems to be kind of coming on a regular basis, which is good, and I'm delighted to see it. Interestingly enough, the minute he comes, or he or she comes, the rest of the birds disappear, which is interesting. I don't know whether it's a case of they actually don't know what this sort of a bird does either, because they haven't seen him before. But certainly for us here, it's kind of exciting to see a woodpecker finally here. I know they've been spreading across the country over the years, and I've heard reports of them kind of not that far away from here, but like 10, 15 kilometers away. But I've never seen them up here, so really delighted with that, and hopefully, fingers crossed, he keeps coming. So yeah, the joys of nature, and that's actually something that we'll be talking about quite a bit in next week's episode. Quite an exciting episode coming up next week, and it is all to do with I suppose, nature and that. So yeah, next week's episode should be a good one. So that's been this week's episode. Looking forward to hearing and seeing how you're getting on with your seed sowing. Proceed with caution, but get going at some stage this month. And yeah, here we go. Every month from now until September, October, we'll be sowing seeds and getting ready to produce flowers and crops. So yeah, that's been this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and until the next time, happy gardening.